Greetings to you. This is the Consciousness Germane. We've been presenting for you a series, Journey Through the Galactic Heritage Cards. And if you remember from the earliest series, we talked about the journey as a whole through all the 108 cards, how it's a roadmap. And on the roadmap, the journey starts off with the idea of the one consciousness, the holographic consciousness that you are, the fragmentation that happened, and the journey into separation, journey into deep polarity, and then the reintegration process and the awakening process, going back to the one. We've gotten to the point in the journey now where we are exploring the very, very deepest of polarity. And that brings us to the Orion civilization. Now, in the previous videos, we were talking about some of the different lineages, most notably the Lyra lineage and the Vega lineage. So you would find then that in terms of the people who populated what we call the Orion civilization, which was comprised of many planets and many stars, they were both of Vegan and Lyran lineages. So there was a mix. Therefore, they looked very different depending upon which planet you visited. However, you might see it as an era, a first era of Orion civilization in which they were playing out this very, very, very deep polarity. Now, we know that many of you watching these videos have read the book Prism of Lyra, so you know the Orion story. Therefore, we're not going to tell the whole story here. We're simply going to outline the idea of the Orion civilization and how polarity was played out there, because it's going to be very useful for as we go into some of the later sections as well. So those of you reading Prism of Lyra, you remember that we spoke about how there were basically three different energies. One was the empire, who was controlling the people. So you have empire, you have the people who were suppressed, and then you have a third element that we've called the Black League. The Black League simply meaning those who are hidden. And these were the freedom fighters, or the activists, who were attempting to free Orion people from the suppression. Now, given that this period of your galactic history is considered the most polarized period in the entire galactic cycle, you can imagine then that this journey toward integration and outside of polarity took a very long time, and indeed it did. So we're looking then at card number 35 here. This is First Era Orion. The theme is deep polarity. Obviously, it's referring to what we were just talking about, that this is the era not only for Orion but also for the entire galactic family, that in which consciousness was the most mired in polarity than it's ever been. Yes, even more so than your planet now. So if you are doing a reading then with the cards and you get this card of deep polarity, what does it mean for you? Well, we do find that most of the people who get Orion cards have a recognition that they've had Orion lifetimes, and actually many people are quite aware of what those lives are. So that could be a very obvious reason for getting a card. But on a more esoteric level, in terms of what is happening within your own consciousness, we would suggest that if you get the deep polarity card, that you really begin to look inside yourself of where you are still experiencing reality through the lens of polarity. where some groups are right, some groups are wrong. And does the wrong group push your button? And if so, why? Because ultimately, in this journey of evolution with consciousness, one has to begin to step outside the lure or the seductiveness of polarity and move back into the perspective of the one in order for transformation to happen. So if this card has come up for you, then it is a suggestion that you begin to look at your own life and look at your own choices, and especially how you interpret or view reality, and seek to begin to shift that view of reality more with the single eye of the one rather than the double eye of the human or the double eye of the polarized being. And that's going to really begin to help you with your own transformation. Now, of course, within the Orion civilization, it took a very long time for them to do this. And the story is quite interesting, which we will be telling as these series of videos go on. All right, so the next card, we like to joke that it's one of the favorite cards because people tend to roll their eyes and experience a lot of resistance when they see this card. It's number 36, again, Orion, first era. The theme is delusion of control. So if you look then at the dynamic within the Orion civilization as an example, you had an empire who was controlling everything, and right down to the minuscule details of society. And then you look at the people being controlled or suppressed. As long as they accept that reality, then the dynamic always stays in place. So it's very similar to the metaphor some of you know about, that you've heard, about the baby elephant who is tied to with a rope to a tree. And it's a very small rope, but the baby learns that he can't be free. So even when he is a big elephant and there's this tiny rope tying him to a tree, he doesn't even have the concept that he can simply just walk forward and snap the rope. So the dynamic within the Orion Empire was very, very similar, being that this dynamic of control was perpetrated so much and then eventually accepted because other ways of being were not even remembered, that kind of kept the dynamic in place. It's only until the inner self that gets angrier and angrier, maybe not even consciously, begins to start awakening. And you'll see that energy, especially in the second era that we will talk about, that change or ideas of change start happening. But for now, that dynamic stays in control. But the card is called delusion of control because ultimately the practical joke, if you will, of the universe is that physical beings and their egos become convinced they can control reality. Reality is uncontrollable. So this is another one of those truths, very important truths, that physical beings eventually learn on the way to their awakening. That the more energy you try to spend manifesting and controlling reality, the farther away you get actually from your awakening process. So this is another reason why the ego wants to keep the delusion intact, because it knows that as soon as the person awakens and realizes control is a delusion and it can continue the process of awakening, that the ego then loses its control and ceases to exist, or that's what it fears. In the last video series, we did discuss the ego. We'll be talking about that a little bit more as well. So, if you have gotten this card, number 36, Delusion of Control, what does that mean? Well, you probably know, but other than the obvious of having had lifetimes at this time within the Orion civilization, other than that, we would say it's really a strong message for you about learning new ways to navigate in the physical reality that do not involve trying to push or control or manipulate events. Because, as you probably well know, it only creates frustration, and no satisfaction arises from that. As you begin to move from third to fourth density, you will find that the energy of pushing or the energy of control becomes less and less effective, and in a sense creates more and more tension or strain. Because now that you are in this awakening process as a species, the next step is learning, in a sense, the opposite of control, which is surrender, which is not a state of uselessness, but actually a state of ultimate connection with the universe. We'll be talking about that a little bit more. So, if you've gotten delusion of control, it's really asking you to look within yourself at the tendencies to want to control things, and as you become more self-aware of your tendencies and your patterns, you can, in a sense, develop a relationship with your ego and keep reminding it, this is not controllable. Let go, let go, let go. We're going to give you a funny image to remember in order to work with this. And this comes from a friend of the channel recently had an experience in meditation. The metaphor is this. If you're in a boat on the high seas, and imagine that you don't really know how to be a captain, but they let you steer the boat. But what they didn't tell you is that the steering wheel is not connected to the boat at all. It's a fake steering wheel. So you're sitting there steering the boat, riding the waves, thinking you're in control, when really the steering wheel is not connected to anything. It's kind of like the way the ego tries to navigate reality. It thinks it can steer the boat, but the steering wheel is not connected at all. So as you begin the awakening process, you learn to let go of the wheel and navigate in a different way. That is not a powerless way, just a very different way. All right, next we go to number 37. We are still in the first era, Orion. Card number 37, the theme is single-minded focus. What does this mean? Well, it basically is speaking to that idea that where your mind goes, energy follows. Meaning that whatever you put your attention on is the reality that shows up in your experience. So for the Orions, being that they were extremely polarized, they were focused on their own experience of polarity to such a degree that it became a closed system. So if you're focused on a certain idea or a certain polarity, that is going to be what you experience. And you will see the harsh divisions between that state of mind and another. Now you see this is playing out on your planet very well within religious structures, within political structures, etc. Whereby the more committed and the more you cling to one point of view, the more the opposite point of view angers you, irritates you, the more self-righteous maybe you become in your own point of view. So that type of single-minded focus mires you more in the polarity that supposedly you might be trying to escape from. So this was certainly the challenge with the Orions. And again, it took them millennia to evolve from that very kind of passionate adherence to their point of view. And you're seeing this on your world now. So if this card has come up for you in a reading, of course, again, the obvious is to look at perhaps past lives that you've had during the Orion civilization, but more importantly, where in your life are you clinging to your point of view about something? This is really important, because as long as one point of view is clung to, the polarities remain separate, and the whole system of polarity stays in place. You're going to see later, in terms of energy dynamics, how the Orions shifted us. And it was quite dramatic, let's say. But for now, simply it will serve you to really begin to look at yourself, look at where you have that single-minded focus that does not allow you not only to see the other side, but to experience it, to embrace the other side. When you can embrace the other side, that's when integration begins. So that's a very, very important message. Finally, we have number 38 here, which is, again, First Era Orion, and the theme is Black League patterning. So we were just defining for you what Black League was, simply referring to the activist group or the resistance group who attempted to fight the empire. But as you've heard the saying, when you fight fire with fire, you only get more fire. So through the single-minded focus of the Black League fighting the empire, they actually helped to keep the dynamic in place. So that is why in this life now, it is very important for individuals to become aware of their single-minded focus and look for how they might be carrying out their focus through perhaps association with different groups, or trying to get other people to change their mind or convert them to their own belief, etc. Those are all themes of Black League patterning, where it is still keeping the polarity dynamics in place. If you get this in a reading, as many people do, it's very likely you had lifetimes within the Black League, as many people have. However, that type of past life information, as you well know, is superficial. Once you know it, so what? There has to be a deeper meaning, a deeper understanding for it. And in this case, it has to do, all of these cards actually have to do with the individual looking clearly without judgment at themselves and looking to see how they keep their own polarity dynamics in place. Because the key to your liberation is always in your hand. You just have to know how to use it. And getting yourself out of this polarity cycle is the way to use the key. And we'll be talking more about that in future sessions. All right, so if you wish to know more about the Orion information, especially during this time, again, there's a chapter in Prism of Lyra, but also there are transcripts and audio files on the website where you can really delve in more if you wish, with some wonderful stories and lessons about how they freed themselves. But eventually, we will return to the story in a future series. So for now, we've given you much to ponder and hopefully much to reflect on within yourself and your own process. And we remind you once again before we close, this is just a journey. A journey into separation and then a journey back to oneness. This experience of separation, the experience of polarity, does not have a meaning. It doesn't mean you have fallen, you are bad, you are not spiritual. It is simply part of the process. So allow yourself to give yourself a break. You don't have to perform any way, shape, or form. We simply just give you these suggestions to help your awakening process be more smooth and easy with the least amount of pain as possible. All right, so that's it for now with the first era Orion, and we will see you next time for the next series. Much love.